The sharp hum of the city drifted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Alexander Carter's penthouse. The skyline shimmered under the night sky, each building standing tall, like silent witnesses to the empire his family had built, but none of it comforted him tonight. Alexander stood by the window, motionless, his reflection blending into the glittering city lights. His dark-tailored suit hugged his broad shoulders perfectly, yet the cold whiskey in his hand offered more warmth than anything else in his life. Behind him, the grand double doors opened with a soft click. Veronica Carter's heels echoed across the marble floor as she entered, her presence as calculated and sharp as always. The air shifted, as it always did whenever she stepped into a room. "You've been avoiding me, Alexander," she said, her voice smooth like silk. Alexander didn't turn. His deep voice was calm but distant. "I've been busy." Veronica chuckled softly. "You always are. But this time, your silence won't fix anything." She paused for a second before continuing. "The board is getting nervous." "They can survive a little nervousness," Alexander shot back, not even glancing away from the skyline. "Honestly, they've put up with way more than this." Veronica squinted, lips tight. "This isn't like last time. After your dad died, there have been gaps everywhere. Investors are circling like vultures. Your enemies? Please, they're just waiting for you to slip up. And let's not kid ourselves. Business is all smoke and mirrors." He finally turned to face her, his stare sharp and guarded, like he was daring her to try something. "So that's what this is? You're not here because you care or because you owe me anything. You just want to spin the story your way," he said, bitterness dripping from his voice. "Control is survival, Alexander," she replied calmly. "And right now, perception demands stability. The company needs a headline that screams confidence." "And you've decided marriage is the solution," he said flatly. Veronica stepped closer, her voice lowering. "It's more than a solution. It's tradition. It's security. You know the media. They respect family values. A strong CEO with a beautiful, supportive wife. That's power." Alexander's jaw flexed slightly. He had heard these arguments before. His father had married Veronica for similar reasons and paid the price emotionally. He stared at her, his voice colder. "I don't need a wife." "You don't need love," she corrected. "You need stability, and you will have full control over this arrangement." She slid a sleek folder across the glass table toward him. Inside were documents, photos, and carefully curated information. Alexander glanced down briefly, scanning the profile. Isabella Martinez, 25, event planner, no major scandals, a clean, quiet life, a face that would look good in photographs beside him. Everything about her felt designed. Alexander paused, then looked at her again. "So, if I may ask, why did you choose her?" Veronica smirked. "Among all the girls in my roster, she's the most qualified. As you can see, she's just a poor girl struggling to make a living, and this opportunity will be great for her and her mother." Alexander's voice lowered. "Is she willing to do this?" Veronica smiled thinly. "Yes. In fact, she's desperate." He raised an eyebrow. "Desperate women are dangerous." "Desperate women," she replied calmly, "are obedient. It's just 1 year. There will be no mess and no legal entanglements after." Alexander stared at her for a long moment, swirling the whiskey in his glass. He weighed the decision like every business deal he had ever made, and yet, deep down, something about this made him uneasy. Finally, his voice cut through the silence. "Set it up." Veronica's smile deepened. "Good. You'll meet her tomorrow." As she turned and walked away, Alexander exhaled slowly, staring back out at the city. As the night deepened around him, something stirred in the pit of his stomach, a strange, quiet sense that this decision would cost him more than any deal ever had. Marriage is not something to joke about, especially with a total stranger. The soft hum of a broken fan filled the tiny apartment as Isabella Martinez sat in silence. Old family photos lined the shelf behind her, images of better days now weighed down by bills and unanswered prayers. On the chipped wooden coffee table before her lay a manila envelope. The contract inside felt heavier than any document should. She had read it at least a dozen times already, but the words didn't get easier. Marriage contract, 1 year, confidentiality agreement, non-disclosure, financial compensation. Isabella's long, curly, dark hair spilled over her shoulders as she leaned forward, her hands trembling slightly. Her soft brown skin glistened under the dim light as she blinked back tears. Across from her, Antonio paced anxiously. His voice broke the silence for the 10th time that evening. "Isa, you don't have to do this," he pleaded, running a hand through his messy hair. "There's got to be another way." Isabella finally lifted her eyes to meet his. "My mother's surgery is scheduled in 3 weeks, Antonio. The hospital won't wait. The bills are piling up. The rent is late. There is no other way. This marriage means everything. Even if I work 10 jobs a day, I won't be able to raise that amount in such a short time." Antonio shook his head, frustrated. "You're selling yourself to the Carters. Do you even know what kind of man Alexander Carter is?" "I know I don't know Alexander in person," Isabella replied, "but Mrs. Veronica told me he's a nice man. And yes, it's just for 1 year. It's not like I'll be doing this all my life." She smiled slightly. "Take a look at the bright side. $1 million just to be a wife for a year. It's a great opportunity. I'm glad Mrs. Veronica saw me as worthy enough to be the perfect bride for her son." "I'll be okay, Antonio. Don't worry about me," she whispered softly. "You know the media stories, Isa," Antonio snapped. "He's ruthless, cold, a billionaire who doesn't care about anyone but himself. I'm afraid for you. You managed to escape from your abusive husband 5 years ago, when your dad forced you to be with him for money. I don't want that to happen again." Isabella sighed deeply. "He won't. Mrs. Veronica assured me I would be taken care of. It's just a contract, not a real marriage. All I'm needed for is to pose for the media, to create a fake narrative. He doesn't want love. He just wants a face for the cameras. I can survive 1 year of pretending." Antonio sat down across from her. "I really care for you, Isa, and I hope you know what you're getting into." She looked at him with a soft gaze and nodded. "Yes, I'm aware." Antonio's jaw clenched. He lowered his head. "All right, if you say so, but don't you think it's right to let them know your real identity and name?" "No," Isabella snapped. "I can never allow that. It would ruin everything. Considering I already had a scandal from my previous marriage, Mrs. Veronica only chose me because I'm young and she thinks I'm perfect. If she knew I was married before, it would change everything. I've been living with my new identity for 5 years, and I don't plan to change that anytime soon." Isabella continued, her voice lowering to a whisper. "I've come too far to lose everything now." The apartment grew quiet again, filled only by the faint buzz of the old fan. Antonio finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "If anything happens, if he finds out who you really are—" "He won't," Isabella cut in. "No one will. Besides, it's just 1 year. Then I get to walk away with $1 million. So chill. Everything is going to go smoothly." She reached for the pen on the table, her hand hovering for a moment as her chest tightened. Then, with one final breath, she signed her name at the bottom of the contract. Isabella Martinez, the fake name she had carried for the last 5 years. Antonio sat back, defeated. His voice cracked. "I just don't want to lose you too." "You won't," she whispered. Tomorrow, she would meet the man who would become her husband for a year. It would be her second marriage, though not a real one, but still, It would be the second time she said, "I do." Would it be the last? The private restaurant was one of the most exclusive in the city, luxurious yet suffocating. Crystal chandeliers glistened above, casting soft light onto the gleaming marble floors. The room was quiet, except for the faint clinking of silverware in distant private booths. Alexander Carter sat at a secluded corner table, posture straight, face expressionless. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit with a crisp white shirt, no tie. His curly black hair was neatly styled, and his dark brown eyes were cool and unreadable as they scanned the room with disinterest. His fingers tapped softly on the polished mahogany table as he waited. He was always early. Punctuality was discipline. Discipline was control. And control was everything. The maitre d' approached and spoke softly. "Sir, your guest has arrived." Alexander simply nodded. Across the restaurant, Isabella entered, her stomach twisting in knots as she forced her legs forward. She wore a soft, elegant pink gown that complemented her skin perfectly. Her long, dark hair was styled in cascading curls that framed her delicate face. She had spent hours preparing, rehearsing every word, every possible scenario. But now, seeing Alexander Carter in person for the first time, her breath caught for just a moment. The photos hadn't done him justice. He was undeniably handsome, but there was a coldness to him, a sharpness that warned of danger beneath the surface. As she approached, Alexander stood briefly, polite but distant. His gaze swept over her quickly, as though analyzing a business acquisition. "Miss Martinez," he greeted simply. "Mr. Carter," she replied softly, offering a polite smile. He gestured toward the chair across from him. She sat, crossing her legs carefully to mask her nerves. A waiter appeared almost instantly, pouring wine into 2 crystal glasses, then silently disappeared. Alexander's eyes settled on her. His voice was calm but blunt. "You're prettier than your file." The words landed unexpectedly. Isabella hesitated only a second, then offered a faint smile. "And you're more handsome, but colder, than I expected." For the first time, a flicker of amusement touched his lips, brief, almost invisible. "Honesty," he said. "That's refreshing." There was a moment of silence, heavy but not uncomfortable. Each studied the other quietly, as if calculating the terms of an unspoken deal. Alexander spoke again, voice steady, measured. "I assume you've read the contract thoroughly." "Yes," Isabella answered softly. "You understand what this is," he continued. "A business arrangement, appearances, public functions, photo ops, nothing more." "I understand," she replied, her voice composed. "You don't want complications. Neither do I." Alexander leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. "So why did you agree to marry a stranger so easily?" Isabella's heartbeat quickened, but her face remained calm. "Sometimes life doesn't offer many choices, Mr. Carter." He studied her, gaze sharp, searching for cracks in her composure, but Isabella held steady, just as she had practiced. "You're young," he said quietly. "Beautiful. You could have easily married a millionaire, or even a billionaire. You have the kind of face most men would die for, excluding me." She smiled gently, though the weight behind her words was heavy. "Not really. It's not as easy as you think. Just because they're wealthy doesn't mean they're good." Alexander stared for a long moment. There was something about her, but he didn't voice the thought. "You don't seem afraid of me," he finally said. "Why would I be? You're not a monster. All I see is a gentle and well-polished man sitting in front of me," she replied softly. "Besides, I've faced worse in life than a gentleman in a suit." He stared at her for a moment, then smirked slightly, face unreadable. Another silence passed between them. This time, it felt different, not cold, just layered. The waiter returned with the first course, and neither of them touched it. Alexander finally broke the silence again, voice lower, more personal. "This will not be a traditional marriage. You'll have your privacy. I expect the same. Public appearances, family gatherings, corporate events. We'll fulfill our roles. But beyond that, we stay out of each other's lives. I don't like drama." Isabella nodded. "Understood." His eyes lingered on her a moment longer. "We're getting married tomorrow." Her stomach twisted slightly. "Tomorrow?" "Why wait?" Alexander said simply. "Delays invite doubt. Doubt invites trouble." She nodded again, forcing herself to stay composed. "Very well." Alexander lifted his wineglass slightly, as though sealing the deal. "To mutually beneficial arrangements." Isabella raised hers, her hand steady despite the storm inside. "To arrangements." Their glasses clinked gently. The deal was done. But as Isabella sipped her wine, her mind raced. Tomorrow she would marry a man who had no idea who she really was. And if the truth ever came out, it wouldn't just cost her the contract, it could cost her everything. Alexander watched her carefully as he sipped his wine. There was something about her he couldn't quite figure out, and that unsettled him. The room buzzed with the low murmur of guests, cameras clicking, flashes popping, journalists whispered, investors watched. The Carter name was trending everywhere already. Isabella stood beside Alexander, her arm gently looped through his. Her face wore a calm, practiced smile, but inside, her chest tightened with every passing second. The officiant's voice faded in and out as she tried to steady her breathing. Alexander glanced at her briefly. "Relax," he whispered, almost mechanically. She nodded slightly, forcing her lips into a soft curve. The vows began. "Do you, Alexander Carter, take Isabella Martinez to be your lawfully wedded wife?" His voice was flat. "I do." "And do you, Isabella Martinez, take Alexander Carter to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She swallowed. "I do." The rings were exchanged without hesitation. The simple gold band slid onto her finger like a lock being fastened. "You may now kiss the bride," the officiant announced. Alexander leaned in, pressing a brief cold kiss to her lips, a dry, polite gesture, businesslike, not romantic. The room erupted into applause. Alexander offered his arm again, and she took it as cameras zoomed in on their perfectly staged union. As they walked down the aisle together, Isabella whispered under her breath, "We did it." Alexander replied softly, "Don't get comfortable." Her stomach tightened, but she kept smiling. Across the room, Antonio stood near the back, partially hidden. He watched the entire spectacle, his face heavy with concern. When Isabella's eyes briefly found his, she gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. "I'll be fine." The celebration was grand, but hollow. The guests were more interested in networking than celebrating. Conversations revolved around mergers, acquisitions, headlines, and business strategies. Hours later, inside the black luxury car driving them home, Alexander spoke first. "This part is done. The real work begins tomorrow." Isabella simply nodded. "Understood." Neither said another word as the car silently moved through the city lights toward the mansion, where they would now share a home. But not a life. At least, not yet. The first days after the wedding were simple, cold, polite, calculated. Every morning began the same. Alexander would leave early, dressed in sharp suits, giving her no more than a brief nod before stepping out. No warmth, no small talk. She became accustomed to the sound of the front door closing behind him before sunrise. One evening, after dinner, Alexander returned earlier than usual. He called Isabella into his study. His tone was firm. She sat across from him, her hands folded neatly on her lap. "We have several events this week," he began. "You'll be attending with me." She nodded. "Of course, sir." He studied her for a moment. "Please stop calling me sir. I'm not your boss." "Don't go out there and mistakenly call me that." Isabella nodded slightly. "So, what should I call you?" He looked at her for a long second, then spoke. "You can call me Alexander at home. At public functions, use something sweet. Just don't say honey. That one's off limits." Isabella chuckled slightly, trying to hide it. "All right, Alexander," he continued, tone neutral. "I'll have a wardrobe delivered. You'll wear only what my stylist provides." Her lips parted slightly, but she bit her tongue. "You'll smile when spoken to. You'll answer questions briefly, nothing personal. Avoid sharing opinions on business matters." She nodded again. "Understood." "And Isabella," he added, voice sharper, "I don't like surprises." She forced a calm smile. "I wasn't planning on surprising you anyway." The first public appearance. The first event was a corporate charity dinner. As they arrived, Alexander whispered instructions just before stepping out of the car. "Stay close, smile, say little. Don't go around chatting with everyone. Don't do too much. You're Mrs. Alexander, remember that." Her face twisted slightly in disgust, but she barely had time to reply before camera flashes exploded. Alexander's arm slipped around her waist, not out of affection, but as part of the show. Inside, he guided her through a sea of powerful men and women. Introductions came rapidly. "This is my wife, Isabella," Alexander repeated, voice smooth and distant. Most guests smiled politely, but some lingered. Their eyes scanned her, judging, measuring, whispering behind champagne glasses. At one point, a woman leaned close, flashing a false smile. "You're very lucky," she said. "Alexander is difficult to keep up with. I can't believe he chose someone like you. You look so innocent." Isabella smiled back. "Not really. I'm not as innocent as I look. And as for Alexander, we bagged each other." She lifted her glass and took a confident sip. The woman's smile tightened before she turned and walked away. Later that evening, in the car, Alexander spoke abruptly. "You talk too much." Isabella turned to him, surprised. "Was I supposed to stay mute when people spoke to me?" He didn't look at her. "You don't need to impress anyone. I saw the way you were feeling yourself. Just because you think you're now a billionaire's wife. Let me remind you, it's just for a year. Behave yourself." The sting was sharp, but Isabella swallowed it. "Understood. You don't have to keep reminding me." 2 nights later, they attended a private dinner hosted by one of Alexander's major investors. Before they left, Alexander stood before her in the bedroom, adjusting his cufflinks. His tone was colder. "Tonight is not about you. It's about closing a deal. Do not offer your opinion unless I ask. Smile. Nothing more." She inhaled deeply, keeping her composure. "I understand." "Good." His voice was devoid of softness. At the dinner table, the host's wife offered subtle jabs and backhanded compliments. "You seem very reserved, dear," the woman said with a smirk. Isabella smiled politely. "I prefer to listen before I speak." The woman chuckled. "A wise choice. Your husband makes all the decisions, I'm sure." Alexander's jaw tensed slightly, but he said nothing. Isabella kept smiling, calm, unmoved. The woman's smile faltered, puzzled by Isabella's serenity. "You really should reduce the way you smile," she said with a laugh. "It might hurt your jaw eventually." Alexander glanced at Isabella with a look of disgust. On the drive home, he finally spoke. "And why were you smiling like a statue back there?" "I was being polite. You told me to smile rather than speak." "Don't be stupid. I didn't say you should stand there grinning like someone without a brain. Use your head." His words cut through her chest. She pressed her lips together and nodded. Of course. As days passed, Isabella learned the different shades of Alexander's mood. When annoyed, he became dismissive. When frustrated, his tone turned sharp. When busy, he barely acknowledged her presence. One afternoon, she brought coffee to his office. He barely looked up. Next time, knock. Her throat tightened. Of course. His attitude was often unpredictable. Still, she bore it. 1 year. Endure it. Smile to the bank. One night, after another exhausting event, Isabella let out a soft yawn as they stepped into the mansion. He glanced at her. Long night? She blinked, caught off guard by the question. Yes. He loosened his tie, and for the first time, showed a rare flicker of humanity. The social games tire me too. Her guard lowered slightly. You hide it well. Practice, he said quietly, then, unexpectedly, you handled yourself better tonight. She offered a small, genuine smile. Thank you. That brief moment softened the edges between them. Late night encounters. Begin one evening, unable to sleep, Isabella walked into the kitchen to make tea. She found Alexander there, pouring himself a drink. Neither spoke for a while. Then softly she said, You don't sleep much either. His voice was low. Sleep wastes time. Rest isn't weakness, Alexander. Says who? He replied. Says most people. When you rest, it helps you process things better. Alexander let out a dry chuckle. You've never handled a multi-billion-dollar company. You wouldn't understand. Besides, women mostly get things handed to them. Look at you, just being my wife for a year, and you'll walk away rewarded without lifting a finger. Must be good to be a woman. His words pierced her like ice. She wanted to snap back, but held herself together. Men always think it's easy for women, she whispered, lowering her gaze. It's not. Alexander chuckled again and sipped his drink. That's what women always say. She said nothing. She remained humble, obedient, never argued. Weeks passed, and the marriage contract? It wasn't as easy as she'd thought. She was burning out, mentally, emotionally, endless schedules, constant appearances, smiling for cameras, faking happiness. It wasn't the life she imagined. She felt trapped, broken. Some nights she cried silently under the covers. Sometimes she called Antonio, just to hear a familiar voice. Alexander remained a mystery. He showed her moments of kindness, then slipped back into cruelty. She found herself thinking, I wish I never agreed to this contract. She felt like she no longer had a life of her own. One morning, after she had arranged a small breakfast in the dining hall, hoping to create a simple moment of warmth, Alexander entered and paused in the doorway. She offered him a polite smile. Alexander, she said softly, I made you breakfast. You should eat before you leave. He looked at her with disgust. What is this? He asked sharply. Breakfast, she replied gently. I don't need you making decisions for me. He snapped. I think you're getting too comfortable. If you've forgotten your place in this house, I can remind you. This is a contract marriage, not a real one. You're not my wife, and you never will be. So stop all this nonsense and stick to business. Her throat tightened. I was only trying to... That's the problem, he cut in coldly. I didn't ask you to make me food. Do I look hungry to you? If I want breakfast, I have maids for that. Don't ever do this again. Isabella lowered her head. Yes, sir. He turned without another word and walked out. Once he was gone, her shoulders trembled. She sat down quietly at the empty table, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. Wiping a few silent tears, she whispered to herself, Why did I even do this? What was I thinking? You do too much, Isabella. It's just a contract marriage. Nothing more. No feelings attached. Get back to business. She muttered under her breath, trying to compose herself. That evening, before a formal board dinner, as Isabella finished getting dressed, Alexander stood behind her, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. "You're looking good, like a real wife of Alexander Carter." She smiled slightly, acknowledging the compliment. "I believe you know how to act. I don't need to repeat myself again." "Yes," she whispered. "Don't embarrass me tonight." "I won't." He lightly tapped her back. "Be a good wife," he said, then walked away. They rode to the event in silence. The air inside the car was heavy, filled with everything they wouldn't say. At the dinner table, Isabella heard the whispers. "She must be good at something. He wouldn't have chosen her otherwise. She doesn't seem like his type. He goes for stronger women, not these quiet little things." She smiled through it all as though she hadn't heard a word. Alexander spoke business with sharp precision, slicing through conversations like a scalpel. His mind was a fortress. During a pause in conversation, one of the investors' wives turned to Isabella with a sly smile. "And what do you think about Alexander's expansion strategy, dear?" The question was a trap. Isabella smiled calmly. "My husband's vision speaks for itself." Alexander glanced at her briefly, almost approving, but said nothing. After the dinner. Back at the mansion, Alexander poured himself a drink, while Isabella stood quietly near the doorway. "You handled that well tonight," he said. Her heart fluttered slightly. "Thank you." A pause. "That's what I want from you. Always know when to speak, and when not to." She nodded. "Yes, Alexander." As he left the room, her shoulders sagged. She muttered to herself, "I don't know who he thinks he is. Know when to speak, know when not to. After I get my money, I'm gone from this hell of a contract marriage." Later that night, she felt lonely. She picked up her phone, wanting to call Antonio, but she stopped herself. He had warned her about this marriage. She didn't want to drag him into her pain. She lay back on her bed and cried quietly. "I don't have myself anymore. I can't do anything the way I want. My life isn't mine. This 1 year is beginning to feel like 10. She clutched the blanket tighter and whispered into the dark, "Mama, I promise everything's going to be all right soon." One afternoon. Unexpected softness. Alexander had decided to work from home that day. Isabella was seated on the couch, casually watching TV while scrolling through her phone. He came downstairs to get water and spotted her. Without his usual coldness, he walked over and offered a polite smile before sitting beside her. "How's your mom? Is she getting proper treatment already?" Isabella was caught off guard by the question. She stuttered a little before answering. "She's responding well to the treatment." "I'm glad to hear that. I didn't know you cared that much." He raised an eyebrow. "Well, I'm not a monster, contrary to what you said the night we met. I guess I have some sympathy." She chuckled lightly. "That's good to hear." He stood up and walked toward the kitchen. Days later, Alexander started spending more time at home. During those moments, he sparked brief conversations with Isabella. They weren't warm, but they were civil, and that alone gave her some relief. At least he wasn't being rude and condescending all the time, but not everyone was pleased. Alexander's close friend, Marcus, never liked Isabella. Her calm nature irritated him. She acted too perfect, and it rubbed him the wrong way. One afternoon, in Alexander's office, Marcus shared his thoughts. "There's something off about her," Marcus said. "She's too polished for someone with no real background." Alexander's jaw tightened. "You've said that already." "And I'll keep saying it. Women like that aren't to be trusted." "Says who?" Marcus leaned closer. "She looks suspicious." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Drop it, Marcus." But in truth, Marcus wasn't the only one having doubts. Veronica, who had handpicked Isabella for the arrangement, received a strange message from an unknown number. The message hinted at Isabella's real identity and her past. Veronica stared at the screen in disbelief. "This can't be true," she whispered. "I need to find out for myself." That night, sitting alone on the couch, she made a call. "I want you to do some digging on Isabella Martinez," she said to her private investigator. "Yes, ma'am," the man replied from the other end. Veronica leaned back slowly, her face unreadable. "Let's see what you've been hiding, sweetheart. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this, and stay tuned for the next part."